Hi guys, and welcome to episode 2 of Behind the Frame. I hope you're enjoying the new format. Today I'm going to take an image that was captured in Botswana's Okavango Delta towards the beginning of last year. Beautiful female leopard who we'd spent a bit of time following. And what I wanted to talk a bit about on this particular image, aside from the technical and editing side of things, was just animal behavior. So we knew that another vehicle had the females. They were following her along the edge of a fairly dense thicket, and she was moving in the direction of where we were coming from. So rather than going and joining that sighting and just literally driving alongside of her, we positioned ourselves in an open clearing. We knew where she was coming from, and we had a fairly good idea that she was kind of set on moving from that thicket into the next one. There was a termite mound positioned perfectly between the two thickets, and so we hedged our bets and hoped that she would go here. Now this is where understanding animal behavior comes in quite handy. So things like leopards and cheetah, even lions, like to get an elevated position just to see what's around them. The other vehicle had suggested that she was on the hunt, and a little bit later on in the morning she did actually make a kill. But hanging around this termite mound gave us a good opportunity, and rather than trying to stick with her and photograph her and then all of a sudden see, oh my word, she's going up onto this termite mound, that was the shot that we were looking for. We positioned ourselves there and waited, and as you can see, we got pretty lucky. So understanding animal behavior is very important. In terms of the settings, ISO 250 at 400 mils, also again with the 400 mil f2.8 lens. F5, just giving myself a little bit of extra depth of field here, wanting to kind of still blur the background, not render absolutely everything sharp and in focus. 1/400th of a second, getting away pretty lucky 1 over focal length. You can see there is a little bit of movement in this paw over here. So if I zoom in, you can see there's a bit of movement in that paw, but detail around the whiskers and the face, beautifully sharp and in focus at 400th of a second. And from an exposure compensation point of view, underexposing by 2/3. Now the reason for that is if you have a look here, a lot of shadows on this termite mound. So the light is coming in from the top left-hand side lighting. Underexposing by 2/3 meant that I was able to preserve and keep these darker areas slightly darker than what the camera would have wanted to. Right. Now again, another touch of animal behavior. In terms of the timing of the photograph, obviously there were a number of images that were taken in the sequence, but the movement of the paw, so that paw position there, that posture shows that the animal is moving, and that's what you want to try and do. Remember, in each image, you're trying to convey a story. Had all 4 paws been firmly on the ground, on the termite mound, it would have looked a little bit awkward. But that paw being raised like that and kind of showing that there's a bit of movement, beautiful tail position as well. And so for me, that's what works. You've got this kind of leading line that runs through and lends itself to pointing you towards the head, and then the paw showing that we're moving. Now, onto the editing. So always starting in the basic panel, you'll see that already, if we reset these developed settings, I like to use a basic import preset. Now, what that means is that when I import each and every image, some adjustments are already applied to it. Now, you can't obviously apply everything, but there's certain things that need to be done. So if we just cycle through before and after views here, very little that you can see, but things that I will do is I will recover a little bit of the highlights, I will add a little bit of saturation, and I will correct any lens distortion, lens corrections, and I will also then apply a little bit of sharpening and masking. So I know that each and every image that I start to edit has been done and worked to that point. So looking at this image, this is now full frame. There's not a hell of a lot that needs to be done to this. We really just want to take this diamond and polish it a little bit. So looking at the histogram, maybe a little bit of space on the right hand side over there. We're just going to pump our whites, just lift those up a little bit. We are going to look at the left hand side there, drop the blacks just a touch. Clarity across the scene. This is something that, if we go too far the one way, you'll see that what happens is this background starts to become a little bit more edgy. The whole scene becomes a little bit too edgy. So what I'm rather going to do is at the end, we're going to come in with a brush and we're just going to lift clarity on our subject and not adjust anything else on this at this point in time. On the tone curve, this is now, remember, tonal contrast. So we're looking at contrast of lights. So we're taking the lightest lights and the darkest lights and just stretching that out a little bit. I'm going to lift these just a little bit, and on the shadows, I'm going to pull those down. So you can see what's nice to do is just throw these sliders left and right, get an idea of what it is actually doing to the image. And again, less is more. So just dropping down, adding a little bit more contrast in these tonal ranges by doing that. detail panel. This is vitally important again, and you can see that based on my basic import preset, this image has already been sharpened by an amount of 37 and to a masking value of 70. So remember, without masking, we're sharpening the whole thing. Anything that is white is what is being sharpened, and by masking, we're progressively sharpening less and less of the image, leaving only the sharpest parts based on depth of field and aperture values to be sharpened. So something like this, if we have a look over around the face and the whiskers at 100% preview in this little box over here, you'll see that we're still sharpening out quite a bit of detail, but we're not sharpening all of that termite mound and busyness in the foreground. Something that I like to apply to a lot of my images is under the effects panel is a post-crop vignette. Now, essentially what a vignette does is it darkens the outer edges of a frame. And as you know, our eye is drawn to the sharpest, brightest, and areas with most contrast in an image. So just again, for illustration purposes, I would never ever do this, but the amount, taking it all the way down, so you can see that it's now started to darken the edges of the frame. Taking the midpoint brings this in tighter and tighter into the center of the frame. Roundness affects the shape of the vignette. And the feather then obviously leaves it with no feathering, so it's a very hard edge, or it increases the feather and basically bleeds out the effect. So my favorite settings for this kind of adjustment is to use an amount of -8, so we're darkening the edges slightly. I like to pull the midpoint into a value of 20, and I like to be quite aggressive on the feather so that it bleeds out. Now, if you have a look at this image, you should hopefully not be able to see anything and say, oh, hang on, I can see what you've done here. You've darkened the edges and all of these things. Just to see how subtle this effect is, if you have a look on each of these panels, you can take that specific panel's effects and switch them on or off to see what the effect has been. So, the effect of a vignette. So you see it's very subtle, just darkening the edges of the frame. And what that does is it brings your attention into the center. And we can be a little bit more aggressive on this one, I think. And so, before without the vignette and with the vignette, and overall before and after. And you'll see that there really hasn't been much done to this image. And that's part of the challenge, is to learn as much as possible so that you can get this right in camera. So not a particularly difficult image from an editing perspective. Final details, just exploring and having a look around the edge of the frame. There's one little distracting element that pulls my eye away from my subject, and it's a tiny thing. It's this little patch of highlight bouquet in the background here. So that's probably a leaf which has caught a little bit of light and is reflecting it. Even though it's soft and out of focus and right out in the distance there, for some reason, as I look at this image, my eye is drawn there. So there's two ways to do this. The one is a little spot removal tool. I prefer to keep everything as natural as possible, so I would rather then adjust this by using the crop. I'm going to crop that out, and then just readjusting the image from a compositional point of view, and there we go. So again, final image, before and after. That's it for this week's edition. I hope you guys have enjoyed it, and looking forward to hearing some suggestions and comments and feedback as always. Thanks again for taking the time to watch. Cheers.